We are told the Great Crusade was a supernova, a sudden explosion of terror and ambition that shattered the silence of the galaxy in a single heartbeat. But the Imperial record is hiding a jarring silence. Between the end of the Unification Wars on Terra and the infamous treaty of Olympus Mons on Mars for the grand campaigns of the Great Crusade, there is a gap, an intentional void within the Imperial records, perhaps. For what transpired within our own system that was deemed better forgotten and undocumented. Before the Emperor could reach the stars, he had to secure his own doorstep. Our solar system is vast, crowded with planetary bodies and ancient secrets, yet the records of their compliance are strangely sparse. What I have managed to unearth regarding this missing link will be documented here. This is the history of the first true test of the Legionnaires Astartes, the conquest of the Selenar Gene Cults on Luna, the screaming of Uranus, the brutal mathematics of the Iron Warriors on Venus, and the transmorphic beauty of the Blood Angels on Neptune. My heart does lift to be back within the silence of my sanctum spire, and to be researching such matters of the past again, the relentless thunder of the Mechanicus cogs finally receding after being in the forges of archives for so long. Yet the pungent aroma of their sacred augments cling to my clothing like a stubborn ghost. I fear it shall be quite some time before I am truly rid of it. And I do confess, I have been hesitating. I've skirted the edges of the great conflict, the catalyst that started the fire that saw the galaxy burn and birth the Imperium we know today, that of the Horus heresy. I have chosen to bypass such daunting chronicles for the time being. They have been documented by minds far more illuminated than my own. Other historitors, oculi, remembrances, and iterators have all walked that well-trodden path. But while I cannot outrun these shadows forever, let us retreat for now, here amidst the dust of my oldest tomes. We shall look past the darkness, and into an age when hope still flickered. I have spoken at length in my previous records regarding the Unification Wars, yet it is a curious irony that more documentation exists for these bloody beginnings than for what followed. This is the next chapter in the fundamental history of our galaxy, the Solar Reclamation, the true crucible of the Great Crusade. Before the Imperium rose to the golden splendour we know today, it needed to reach beyond its own horizons. To pierce the veil of the outer stars, the Emperor's firstling Imperium had to break free of its own stellar volume, and so his eye looked upon Luna, our Earthworld's only natural satellite. It was a relic of the dark age of technology, its interior carved into labyrinths of gene vaults, manufactura, and sealed laboratories where ancient sciences still pulsed like dormant hearts. Ruling these depths were the Selenar Gene Cults, heirs to forbidden knowledge. They were not united, each maintaining their own petty kingdoms. They shaped flesh as artisans shape marble. In their underground laboratories, they bred armies in nutrient vats and guarded their secrets with zeal that bordered on the psychotic. Luna was steeped in technologies vital to his great design. Its forges would be needed, its gene vaults were invaluable, and had been spared much of the damage that years of neglect and war had inflicted upon those remaining on Terra. As the homeworld itself fell under the Emperor's unifying hand, the Selenar watched with growing unease. But their time was due. Shortly before the full compliance of Terra, Luna would be taken, circa 703 M30. Its compliance was inevitable, but inevitability does not come without resistance. They had survived Old Night through isolation and secrecy. The idea of submitting to a single ruler, even one as radiant as the Emperor, was an affront to their ancient pride. Envoys were of course sent, as the Emperor wanted to avoid any unnecessary losses of both manpower and the gene vaults. Terra was still not fully unified under the Raptor and Lightning Bolt banner, so any resources that could be spared would be a boon. But Luna had other plans. It is said in what scraps of information I can find on this most ancient of subjects, that the last envoy was rebuked in a truly grand and ignoble manner. The envoy and their entourage returned to the palace as one, stitched together as a horrific flesh golem. The Selenar Gene Cults had declared war, and so the Emperor prepared to teach them the cost of defiance and their arrogance. For this task, the Emperor did not turn to the baseline armies of old Earth, nor to his degrading and erratic Thunder Warriors. He turned to his newborn legionnaires Astartes. This would be their first true test. To the conquest of Luna, he committed 3 legions, each selected for their precision, disciplined, and unyielding resolve. The 7th Legion, the 13th, and the 16th Legion. None of these had earned a true name yet, but in the coming battle, one would be branded forevermore. Their departure from Terra, one could imagine, would have been a sight etched into the memory of all those who witnessed it. No such craft or force of might had breached Terra's diminished atmosphere in millennia. A fire of crude rocket engines rose from humanity's cradle, each plume a declaration that the age of isolation was ending. As the craft headed into their trajectory, some went dark. The Astartes of the 16th Legion drifted silently towards Luna, having cut all power, their enhanced biology and advanced power armor keeping them alive in the frigid cold as they made their approach, gliding through the void like arrows loosed into the night, invisible to the sonar augurs that scanned the heavens for the incoming threats. Behind them, the 7th and 13th Legions advanced in disciplined formation, their craft burning bright against the black. The Selenar cults were ready for them, but unknown to the cults, he had already planned far ahead. For each envoy, diplomat and peace summit sent to Luna, it can be safely assumed he had also sent members of the Officio Assassinorum within their ranks, a dark and foreboding organisation befitting of its name, and if one lives long enough to record it, worth a chronicle in their own right. For while the blades of the Officio Assassinorum are many, not all are lethal. There are various temples worshipping the wide manner in which ones can end a life, but the works of the Vanus Temple are more subtle. They are key information brokers, intelligence gatherers and strategists. Although not officially recorded as being involved, as they never are, their footprint in this matter are there for those who dare to look. As the Imperial fleets closed in, the defense systems embedded across Luna's surface awoke in a fury. Macro-laser rays fired, concealed missile silos ignited, and ancient beam projectors spat fire into the void, turning the approach into a storm of lethal light. But as quickly as they had roared into life, they simply died. For all the bluster of the main assault, the 16th Legion's silent craft had gone unnoticed. They struck their targets with the full might of a spear hurled from Terra, hitting the exact locations identified by the intelligence gathering operations mentioned previously. Power was cut, and supply logistics were disrupted and communication stations destroyed, causing confusion and panic amongst the defenders. Into that confusion, the 16th Legion hunted. The bioengineered guardians of the gene vats were cut down. The design of the gene cults able to do little to stop the tread of ceramite boots. Selenar strongholds fell, and the gene bolts were breached. The 7th Legion established fortified footholds with unbreakable method, while the 13th Legion executed sweeping maneuvers that fractured the defenders' cohesion. Meanwhile, the 16th Legion carved a path straight into the Mons heart. Within just 6 solar hours, the battle was over. Luna, ancient, proud, defiant Luna, had been brought into Imperial compliance. Faced with annihilation, the surviving Selenar matriarchs transmitted their surrender to Terra. Their message was terse, desperate, but forever etched into Imperial record. Call off your wolves. So the 16th Legion earned their name. They were the Lunar Wolves, the Emperor's chosen hunters. Broken and humbled, the gene cults bent the knee. Lunar forges were placed under the oversight of the Imperial household, and its gene labs were repurposed to become the birthplace of the Legionnaires Astartes. The moon became one of the Imperium's most vital assets. Luna's fall ensured the rise of the era of the Astartes, better or for worse. Its compliance ensured the Great Crusade was not just a dream, but a reality. But there were other worlds in the system. Most notably, of course, lies Mars, the red world whose destiny has been intertwined with humanity since the first colonists made landfall. Mars was home to the Mechanicum, a techno-theocratic empire that revered the machine god and preserved the sciences that Terra had lost. It was this religion that had united the Forged world long before the Terran Unification had fired its first bolt round. Such statements are dramatic, for sure, and sourced from the Mechanicus archives directly. But given Mars's role in such engagements as the Tempest Gallery, involving the 18th Legion, along with their persistent raids on Terra, Jupiter and Saturn during the Age of Strife, it is incredible. Much like Luna, the The Emperor of Mankind did not want war. He knew it would be costly and bleed both sides of precious resources needed for his vision of the Great Crusade. And so, a deal would be struck. As mentioned in previous records, one can imagine, dearest listeners, the wording, sub-wording, clauses and contingencies written into such a contract would be most carefully formed. The Treaty of Olympus Mons bound Terra and Mars as twin capitals of the Imperium. One of flesh, one of steel. But like any contract worth the sacred vellum in which it was written upon, neither side was satisfied, per se. The tech priests were forbidden certain studies and areas of experimentation, such as the accursed abominable intelligence, the arcane or the psychic. In return, the Emperor allowed Mars to remain independent, having claim over all forged worlds and technology found in the coming crusade. With curiosity, though, he allowed the continuation of its worship of the machine spirit, seeing him as its divine incarnation, the Omnissiah. For those of you who have been paying attention to the previous chronicles, should notice this goes completely against the enforced philosophy of his imperial truth. But it was a concession that saved the lives of countless auxiliary forces, preserved the strength of his Astartes, and saved the precious Martian infrastructure, all of which would be needed for the wars to come. With this pact came the Titan legions, the Night Houses, the forges that armed the Imperium and the priests that would tend to its machine spirits. Mars is the anvil upon which the Imperium's wars are forged. With an army raised on Terra, the Astartes on Luna, and both armed by the forges of Mars, the Sol system was primed for the taking. As one would hope is well known, there are other worlds within Sol. Closest to Sol itself is Mercury, world of blistering heat, firestorms, solar radiation winds and gravitic shifts. It bent the knee, fully complying to his will, with no need of treaty or blade. I have heard rumours, which I will state here but note as not being fully sourced, that Mercury is home to a fully esoteric manufactorum, one outside the control of Mars, that produced, or perhaps still does, some of the most advanced energy shields, the Scythian pattern Aegis, used by the Astartes, specifically those of the first, as they were singular in dealing with the true nightmares that stalked the void. They were gifted such things by the Emperor for that purpose. So one cannot dismiss this out of hand. If this rumour is true, it is fascinating. I will endeavour, of course, to uncover more of this when requesting the archives of the first for future chronicles. But next within the Sol system is Venus. Venus is a world of beautiful, suffocating paradox. To look upon its sulphuric clouds from a distance is to see a shimmering jewel. To stand beneath them is to endure an atmospheric pressure that would crush a tank, like a discarded ration tin of cold start. In the fractured twilight of the old night, Venus was not a world of industry, but a domain of sorcerous terror. It was ruled by the war witches, matriarchs of the esoteric who commanded lithogolems, described in the sanctioned archives as monstrous constructs. Thankfully, the records do not go on to say what those are specifically, but I have had enough of sorcery in my studies as of late. These mindless constructs did not know fear or pain, and for centuries they had held the planet in a grip of obsidian and blood, resisting any who dared to bring the light of reason to their toxic spires. As you can imagine, dearest listener, the liberation of Venus was not won with diplomacy, but with the cold, unstoppable logic of the Fourth Legion, then known as the Corpse Grinders, but what we would know now as the traitorous legion of the Iron Warriors. During the early Great Crusade, the Fourth Legion descended during the Mer Yast campaign, while others might have faltered against the supernatural resilience of the aforementioned lithogolems. Perturabo's sons applied their brutal trademark mathematics of destruction. They turned the planet's own crushing atmosphere and volcanic heat into tactical assets, grinding the War Witches' citadels into dust through relentless siegecraft. When the Iron Warriors departed, the sorcery of Venus was broken, replaced by the rhythmic industrial heartbeat of the Imperium, creating the supply lines needed to keep the non-stop forges of Mars going. Following its integration, Venus underwent a transformation. The planet became a powerhouse of production, an industry world feeding the war machine of the Sol system. Yet, in the upper reaches of the atmosphere, far above the acid rains and lead-melting heat, a different world emerged. A network of luxury resorts orbitals was established, floating like ivory islands in the clouds. Here, the nascent High Lords and the elite of the soul found respite, sipping rare vintages while watching the sun through layers of amber glass. It is a chilling irony of both the 31st millennia and the millennia of today that a world conquered through the most brutal, joyless warfare imaginable, below the choking wastes, industrial menial to labour, became the ultimate sanctuary of relaxations for those who rule the stars, view it from above. With the inner systems taken and supply lines established, it is time to look beyond the asteroid belt to the outer systems. These outer worlds were old and noble, but under siege, having been the first to fall prey to Xenos warbands and the foulest of slavers the void could bring against the system. They were the bulwarks, shielding the inner systems from the true external terrors that the old night brought upon humanity. The campaign of Jupiter stands as one of the most pivotal early victories of the Solar Reclamation, marking the moment the nascent Imperium secured the industrial firepower necessary to arm a galaxy-spanning empire. But the task would not be easy. The world itself was its own system of moons, dockyards and celestial bodies. Even before the inner worlds were brought to heel and the proverbial ink on the Treaty of Mars not yet dried, he who sent his legions and imperial forces to secure what they could. As the Jovian shipyards were the ultimate prize, and destroying them in any frontal engagement would have been a hollow victory, he sent his hidden blade, the 19th, in the shadow of Jupiter's immense radiation-choked bulk. The 19th Legion, veterans of the bloody unification of old Earth, found themselves committed to a campaign that would eventually be scrubbed from the very memory of the Imperium. While the Great Jovian Range was a glittering crown of industry, boasting the peerless luxury of the Saros Station and the geo-engineered ocean expanse of Europa, it was also infested by the Xenos presence that had held the void settlements under a suffocating grip. To break this stranglehold, the Emperor's hosts were unleashed across the Jovian lunes. Yet while the histories speak of the shipyards of Ganymede and the mutations' fortresses of Caral, they fall into a chilling, absolute silence regarding the moon of Lysithia. The future Raven Guard was tasked with the scouring of that tiny satellite. If the records of the broader Solar Reclamation are considered incomplete, those pertaining of this tiny moon are virtually non-existent. Whatever horror the Legion encountered in those cramped, dark habitats may have resulted in a victory. The Xenos were indeed annihilated. They were followed into oblivion by every single human settler they had enslaved, along with a staggering portion of the 19th Legion's own strength. In the aftermath of the Scouring, what perhaps most unsettling than the battle itself, the details I have obtained here speak that the survivors, veterans to a man, were abruptly recalled by the masses of the Emperor's gene forges. These warriors were led away into the depths of his own personal labs, never to be returned to their brothers and never to be heard of again. What stains they carried upon their gene seed, or what unspeakable acts they had enacted to achieve victory on that cursed moon, remain a matter of dark conjecture. For no other instances exist of the Imperial archives of a Legion being systematically thinned of its veterans in such a secretive and clinical manner. One could argue that of the 2nd and the 11th, but they were completely obliterated. This was something more terrifying, and I will not linger on such a subject. And so, as the Reclamation forces pushed outwards, the Jovian Range remained a vital, thrumming heart of the Mechanicans' power. From the ancient spindle of Saros to the clandestine shipyards of Thule and Ganymede, Jupiter itself stood as a grim testament that the expansion of the Emperor's light was not merely a matter of conquest, but a selective pruning of history itself, where the cost of unity was often the total erasure of those who had paid the highest of prices for it. The fall of Jupiter provided the Imperium with the essential assets that would define the coming centuries. The Jovian shipyards became second only to Mars in production capacity, eventually birthing the massive battleships and grand cruisers that would push the Crusade into the Outer Rim. With the gas giant's industrial might secured, the Great Crusade finally possessed the logistical strength to bite back into the dark. Next was the reclamation of Saturn, and the integration of the solar system's most sophisticated shipwrights into the burgeoning Imperium. During the dark centuries of the Age of Strife, The Saturnine Ordos had evolved into a powerful independent stellar empire consisting of ring cities and fortified moons. These Ordos were ruled by a merchant militant aristocracy whose possessed a naval tradition that rivaled even the ancient myths of Terra, with a formidable and vast army to match. Unlike many of the more devolved or warp-tainted cultures encountered during the early Reclamation and Great Crusade, the Saturnine orbits remained a bastion of human technological competence, protected by a massive automated defence grid that turned the planet's rings into a lethal labyrinth for any invading fleet. However, seeing the unification of Terra, its full control of the inner system, and the 19th Legion's series of rapid assaults on Jupiter, the Saturnine realms knew it would be their turn next. They signalled their intent to Terra to parley before blades and bolters stormed their own dockyards. With the combined might of the two gas giants joining that of Mars, the reclamation of the true outer planets was certain. Next, far beyond the warm cradle of Terra and the red forges of Mars, lies Uranus, the seventh world of Sol. It is a pale, distant giant, a swirling mass of ice-blue storms with no surface upon which any human might stand. Yet humanity claimed a space around it, in fragile void stations that clung to its orbits like lanterns in a frozen night. Among these drifting sanctuaries lived the Azarites, a quiet people who endured dangerous strife not through conquest or fanaticism, but through craft, cooperation, the deep reverence for the void they called home. They welcomed the reclamation fleets, happy to see the reinforcements desperately needed to protect from the Xenoslavers and marauders that frequently targeted their hab stations. What happened next, though, was a dark sign of things to come, that the void held true nightmares the likes of which humanity cannot possibly fathom. The record herein comes from my budding relationship with the chapter of my homeworld. Their record-keeping and ability to obtain a near-endless supply of knowledge is a boon for my role within the Logos Historia Vertia, but such a thing does raise my eyebrow, for these are records that must surely be sealed, or one that should not be in the possession of these Astartes. I would be loath, however, to turn away such priceless information. The record states the catastrophe began without warning. A strange affliction crept through the Azarite stations, a sickness with no fever, no rash, no wound. Instead it brought voices. At first the afflicted whispered of distant cries, as though something was calling to them from beyond the hulls. Then the cries grew louder and sharper, till they drowned out all reason. The Azarites named it the Screaming, though no name could capture the horror of it. Within days, artisans became madmen. Within weeks, their bodies twisted, their flesh warping into shapes that defied all natural law. The warp had found them. It was remaking them. Desperate pleas were, of course, sent towards Terra, but by the time the messages reached the inner systems, entire stations had fallen silent. The Emperor could not ignore such a threat, not so close to the throne, and not with the Great Crusade still in its infancy. And so he dispatched the 7th Legion, the Imperial Fists once again, whose duty was absolute and knowledge of the home system paramount. The Astartes boarded the Azarite stations, expecting plague victims. What they found were half-formed demons, their bodies still wearing faint echoes of the artisans that they once were. The screaming filled every corridor, clawing at the minds of even the gene-forged legionnaires. For it was darkly stated in these forbidden data slates and helm logs that even the Astartes were not immune to this. The 7th Legion quickly shut off all audio input, relying now purely on their combat instincts and visual signals. They advanced without a shadow of hesitation, driven by the grim realization that no cure remained to be found and no salvation could be offered to those already lost to the madness. In the face of such an absolute contagion, the only remaining mandate was containment, enforced by a cold and total silence that swallowed every chamber it touched. One by one, the ancient void systems of Uranus were systematically purged, as cleansing fire was washed through their arched hallways and reactor cores were intentionally overloaded. A desperate and scorched earth effort to finally drown out the relentless cacophony of screaming. At the very end, as the last structures buckled under the weight of the vacuum, that horrific unending scream finally fell silent. As the final orbital station was consumed by the void fire of its own destruction, the Azarites were utterly erased from the galactic record alongside the Imperial Fists who had been sent to aid them, leaving no living soul to recount the horrors of their final hours. While a solitary, fractured transmission from the surface offered the surrounding blockade fleets a brief, harrowing glimpse into the catastrophe that followed, the chance for a response was severed, for the primary reactor underwent a terminal detonation. It is widely whispered, among the hushed circles of those that know of such things, that the explosion was the deliberate act of the last surviving Astartes, choosing a clean end in the silence of the vacuum over whatever fate awaited them in the dark. I hark back to my previous note on how this record came to be in this chapter's vaults. I am glad that it has surfaced, so that this sacrifice can be remembered. The fact that this happened, despite the world being fully compliant, with no recidivism or acts of rebellion noted, caused shockwaves among the higher powers. Not long after an account of what happened, based on what little information was available at the time, focus shifted. Reclamation was no longer in favour. Purgation was. Any acts of rebellion against the state were met with the chainswords of the legionnaires. Pirates and marauders, whether human or xenos, were no longer tolerated as pests, but were proactively hunted to extinction. Any and all holdouts and dens of depravity were scoured from Sol's light. The Ninth Legion was sent to obliterate the mutant hordes around Neptune. As the warp storms of the Age of Strife severed the umbilical cord to Earth, the pioneers on that most distant of planets were left to the mercy of a world that was never meant to harbour life. For millennia, the pressure and the cold worked upon the human form. Under the suffocating weight of this mantle, DNA drifted. Limbs elongated or withered, skin grew translucent and slick to shed frozen ammonia. Eyes widened into lidless, pale orbs to catch the ghost light of the distant soul. Into this, the Ninth Legion cleaved like a scythe into weeds. No need did they prevail against the odds. As far-flung as they were from support and the growing supply lines weaving across the system, they thrived. Using their own gene seed variation to their advantage, they sculpted the mutated crop into the perfection that is the Ninth Legion. With all the worlds within the Kuiper Belt now under the new banner of the Twin Eagles of Terra and Mars, humanity could, for the first time in millennia, fully utilise an interplanetary empire. Trade routes were established, and merchant fleets could move freely under the protection of the growing Navis Imperialis. However, unknown to most, out in the very far reaches of Sol, lay a mystery, one that even I can find little to no information on. A 10th planet. The conquest of Sedna was not a battle. It was the closing of a tomb and a deletion of history. Deep within the freezing shroud, the inner Orc cloud, where the light of Sol is nothing more than a cold, mocking needlepoint in the black, lay Sedna. What it was, we know not. One could hypothesize it was the long-forgotten outer fortress of humanity, or a xenocrated stain within the glimpse of Sol's light, for whatever it was to be purged. The Emperor did not send a single strike force. He summoned a literal tide of transhuman power. In a rare and terrifying display of unity and imperial might, 8 entire space-bringing legions converged upon the artificial rock. The names of the Xenos, they thought, had been struck from Imperial records, scrubbed to ensure no memory of their foulness remained. And with that, the reclamation of the Sol system was complete. It was more than a series of military victories. It was primarily a forge that tempered the Imperium's very soul, telling us the searing threshold where the fractured human spirit was hammered into a single unbreakable resolve. From the gene vaults of Luna to the rad wastes of Venus and the frozen silences of the Oort cloud, the Emperor transformed a collection of isolated dying remnants into a unified engine of conquest. With the home fire secured and the light of the Astronomicon beginning to pierce the galactic gloom, the Great Crusade was no longer a Terran ambition. It was a manifest reality. The Sol system stood as a fortress monastery on a planetary scale, the staging ground from which the Legionnaires Astartes were soon to depart to bring the Emperor's truth to the furthest reaches of the stars. To commemorate the final unification of the Sol system, the Emperor issued a decree that a singular artificial wanderer, a relic born of the forgotten genius of the Dark Age of technology, to be seized and brought into the Imperial fold. This ancient construct, which returns to the cradle of humanity once only 1,000 years or so, along a jagged and hauntingly irregular elliptical path, was meticulously modified under his personal direction, to serve as a monument to those who had died for his vision of reclamation. Reborn as the Shrine of Unity, the comet was transformed from a ghost of the past to a potent and enduring symbol of Imperial strength, acting as a gleaming beacon of unified purpose that forever tethered the bloody triumphs of Terra to the infinite starless ambitions of the Great Crusade. The Crusade itself will, dearest listener, have to wait for another chronicle. But for now, remember, knowledge is power. Got it well. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to support the channel. It genuinely helps more than you can imagine. Drop a like, share the video, and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you want to go even deeper, links to my Patreon and socials are in the details below. Until next time, take care. I'll see you in the next one.